This one, Mike, it seems to be directed at you, but I think we'll let the other panelists have a go at this too as well. How much of extra capital expenditure on intervention work was a result of historic neglect in upkeep? Okay, Mike? It's an easy one to start with.
Thank you. When did you stop beating your mother-in-law? Sort of question, that one, isn't it? I think what we see is about £500 million spent last year, and the feeling I get is an awful lot of that £500 million wasn't anticipated a year ago and was very much pushed into budgets. It'd typically been running at a much smaller number than that. And what you have been seeing was that there is quite a high lot of spend on assets, but that's been much more in the OPEX maintenance, OPEX side of things. So on the positive side, people are capitalising this activity because they're actually doing stuff for the long term, which means that they are thinking about the long-term future of the basin, which is good. It's very hard to see how much of that wasn't anticipated and how much of that was actually correcting things which could have been addressed before that, Malcolm. The sort of way people send us the information, they tell us what they're spending the money on, but they don't quite say why they spent it. So, a hard question to answer, but I think the positive side is that people are investing for the long term in what they're doing, because they want to make sure their infrastructure and their assets are man enough for the job and are able to do that job for many years ahead.
So, James, do you think there's any degree of neglect?
I don't think it's neglect. I think the biggest challenge is actually having the time and the bed spaces on the platforms to actually monetize all of the work. There's a finite amount of people who can show up to work offshore. There's a finite number of jobs that they can do. I know within my organization, it's not an issue about how much money we can dedicate to that task. It's really the wrench time and the execution time that we can get the things completed. So all of those activities are prioritized. You're talking about a program that can run over 3 years before what you see today you actually execute. So this is 50% of my North Sea spend, maintaining the infrastructure of a rather mature set of assets. I think it's expected. I think it's necessary. If you're in for the long term, it's a necessary investment.
Thanks. Derek, do you want to add anything on that? Or?
I don't really
You're happy with that? Okay. Right. The next question, and I'm just taking these in the order in my hands, is for you, James. Well, it is for you too. What will happen in your business if the Chancellor doesn't deliver fiscal incentives?
Well, I've been pretty vocal about what my company is doing and what my company isn't doing today in the North Sea. And I'll say it again, we're, in my opinion, running at half speed in this basin. We have directed a lot of talent and capital to our other area of business executed out of our Aberdeen staff and Aberdeen office, our business basically in West Africa. But I could double my 5-year plan in the North Sea if the right fiscal incentives are put in place. And I'll be open about that. That's over £1 billion of investment, which I would clearly say and have said is at risk if there isn't a positive fiscal change.
Well, I'll be open with you. I'm not going to ask the next question. Gets in everywhere. It's a question on the City Garden project. I'm not going to ask that. But if I met, gets in everywhere, doesn't it? It's a bit like, I wonder where the one is on the independence referendum. That's going to be in here soon as well. I'm not going to answer that, but I would actually remind everybody that the poll on that, doesn't it? It closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. And if I could just express the view, and I hope that the business community, and particularly the oil and gas community, will take that opportunity to make their views known on that project. So if you're on the electoral register in Aberdeen, I hope you'll take your responsibilities there seriously. And of course, I'm not going to do anything as crass as to suggest which way you should vote. Okay, this is for you, Derek, but I think we can put this across the team. The Ministry of Defence has about 6,000 known naval wrecks and does nothing to remove them. Why are we spending so much on oil and gas decommissioning removal? Good question.
You did say this was for me, did you? Well, almost an outsider's observation. I mean, I don't know whether the work has really been done yet to establish the most effective manner in which decommissioning will take place. I know there are work streams and groups within Oil and Gas UK and elsewhere taking a look at exactly the technologies, and I know from the work I referred to in my presentation that we did with Douglas Westwood, it does depend on the next generation of super heavy lifting vessels. There's lots of imponderables out there as to exactly what the final analysis will be, and I'm sure what the final tally will be for the cost of decommissioning. So is it absolute set in stone as to what will occur over the next 30, 40 years? I suspect not, and therefore it is conceivable that we could have a change in approach to some extent. Beyond that, I'm not qualified really to say.
Thanks. Should we come along? Well, James, you want to come in next?
Sure, Malcolm, thank you. I think the main issue is the government, and actually maybe the people, think when oil and gas industry decommissions oil and gas properties that they're actually spending oil and gas dollars. I think it is actually only this year where the real realization that 50 to 75% of the cost is coming from the public purse, that we've got the government's view and interest in understanding that they're spending that money. I mean, we're spending it on their behalf. And they have some role to play in the scope of decommissioning. But that insight about, this is actually what the nation is spending is only growing, I would say, in this year. And the naval vessels on the seabed, that was always part of the public exposure, and it was accepted. I think that we're just starting to appreciate that actually so is part of the infrastructure in the oil and gas industry. Again, 50 to 75% of it is this nation's exposure, not just big oil's exposure. And the better we can educate people about that, I think in the long term, the better we'll be cost effective on decommissioning, doing the right scope.
Yeah, and the importance of collaboration comes through again. This is a joint problem, isn't it? Mike.
Thank you very much indeed. My technology is getting worse for me. Thanks, James. I think the only thing I'd add is that as an industry, we start from the right place in that companies are prepared and have put or will put aside the funds they need to be able to decommission in its entirety and remove what they put out there. That then has to be balanced, as we all know, against what is most sensibly done from the environmental point of view. I was working for Shell during the years of Brent Spar and saw an awful lot of the discussions from afar. I was not in the UK at the time, on what was the right solution and what was the most appropriate solution. And I think we're still learning. It may well be that we one day see that there are some different solutions which come out with a much better outcome than simply just taking it all away, grinding it into pulp and actually filling roads with it. Who knows?
Thanks, Mike. The next question is for you. There are no HMG, HMT attendees this morning. How come?
Well, I was told that they're pretty short of money and can't afford to fly north for the who knows. I'm very sure that they will have electronic copies on their in trays not very long after we leave this morning. I do know they have, because of the way we collect the information, that information is shared fully with DEC and with Treasury. So I do know they have insight into what's going on. And horror of horrors, because of modern technology, I suspect they can watch and see whatever they want because of the internet, even though that does make me roll my eyes at the thought of anyone watching me on the television. That would be dreadful. But so they are engaged, they know what's going on, and we want to make sure that they catch that information. So remotely they will do.
I think I'd add to that and agree with them. I don't think there's any question about lack of engagement from Treasury officials, DEC officials in these discussions we've been having. They've been there throughout and they're very committed to it. And I think, actually, frankly, I think they've done a good job in that engagement. Okay, Derek, one for you again. This is a philosophical question for you. CFOs are a systematically gloomy bunch. Strikes a chord. What about a similar survey of chief executive officers? Would you expect the same forecast?
Well, given that my main client base probably is direct into CFOs, I should first of all say that that's far from the case, that they are, by definition, a gloomy bunch. I think to the extent that CFOs are focused very much on, are looking largely at a financial markets at the moment, then I'm not surprised by those outputs. I think some of the uncertainties, particularly that headline around concern about euro, I'd be surprised if CEOs didn't also carry around with them those real concerns. And I know that a number of businesses have already undertaken quite a bit of scenario planning around implications for further problems within Eurozone, and that's driven from the very top in those businesses. So I do think the risks would be fully appreciated by CEOs, and as I say, they will want to see action and understanding of what the implications could be of some of the current economic dynamics. So perhaps tempered by some other factors, but by and large, I think yes, I do just generally think that.
Yeah, an unfair question, James. Would your CFO take a movier position than you?
I think every company needs an accelerator and a brake to drive successfully. And I've seen my CEO and CFO share that role at different times. So I wouldn't want to be stereotypical. It's nice to see the balance.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. With all this talk on decommissioning, what is being done to create a viable UK PLC capability to keep money flowing through HMT's coffers? The inference being we're overdoing the decommissioning bit. Michael, can we start with you?
It's funny, I was tidying my parents' house recently. My parents, last woman passed away a little while ago, and you're starting to collect up various bits and pieces and effects of stuff. And I found a letter I'd actually dropped to my parents when the Brents had not been long in production. I'd just moved to work as an engineer in the North Sea. And so it's very strange seeing both ends of the life cycle of some of the enormous investments that I have going on now. And the reality is that as some things go, other things are happening. So I think the income stream from the Treasury point of view is very positive. So even in the years ahead, even in periods when we could have some quite intense activity on decommissioning, the total spend on decommissioning a year is probably even now sitting at still only parts of £1 billion. But for many years to come, if we get the recipe right, there's still very productive investment going on to match. So it is very much a case of trying to keep both the main job going as well as still looking for the sustained spend on decommissioning. So that's probably my observation.
Yeah, and I might just add that the point I made about uncertainty in the whole decommissioning space and the tax-related relief is critical to this, so that we solve that, we find an effective solution to that sort of issue, then it does feed through into increased activity, it does feed through into less uncertainty, businesses more prepared to the economics to work better, more prepared to make that investment, and as a consequence, that activity driving revenues into the exchequer as well. So it's not just a one-way street in terms of additional tax relief as those decommissioning expenditures fall.
Thanks. Jay.
If I could stress the importance of collaboration in order to keep the industry viable and alive in the long term. I think this year industry has collaborated very well with Treasury and DEC to somehow find a way to share with the officials what is normally confidential company positions, and to have that data collected and shared in aggregate, but confidential in specifics, has allowed us to put forward initiatives and opportunities for Treasury this year that we haven't been able to achieve as an industry in the past. And I'd like us to mature that model in the future, further collaboration with Treasury, with DEC, and with our industry colleagues to drive what's the right answer for this basin, which is a tailored fiscal system that allows us to exploit every barrel that's out there and available to us. And I think the more collaboration, that will be better. I think we need to do more innovation. Have to get some science involved in this too, because not everything is currently defined. And all of that activity, again, supports the industry, supports the people of the United Kingdom, and I think it should be all our goal to delay decommissioning of this fantastic asset base for as long as we possibly can.
Thanks, James. Okay, I think we'll start with you as well on this next question, okay? But we'll come along the panel. What is the panel's anticipated response to the Exchequer's tax relief from 2012 onwards? So in other words, I think that's saying, if you get what you want, what do you expect to happen?
I expect it will enable twice as much activity in this basin, and that is a substantial increase in activity. I think that will enable some 30 billion pounds of extra wealth generated for the nation, and some 10 billion pounds of wealth generated for company shareholders. So still the balance is very heavily weighted to the UK, the resource owner. But if we can get the systems and the structures we've asked for, we can double the investment potential of this basin. Clearly, we won't all execute it in 1 year. What we're working on is the activities we're going to execute 3 to 7 years from now. And I guess alternatively, without those fiscal changes, 3 to 7 years from now, it's going to be hard to imagine 500 people in a room talking about this.
Thanks, James. Mike?
As James says, it comes down simply to the next wave of investment and the next initiatives. In 2006, we saw investment tailing off. The new field allowance structure came into place because of that. In 2002, we originally saw 100% capital allowances come in simply to keep the tax regime encouraging investment at the same time as taking rent out of things. And so it is going to have to be part of the future. Derek and I were chatting just before we sat down for breakfast here, and we have increasingly got a very progressive tax regime here. So yes, they're creaming an awful lot more of the profit out because of the high tax rates, but to be able to sustain investment, when you have such a tension at the top end of things on tax rates, you need to keep encouraging that new investment going along. So it is simply a business choice. Does the government want to sustain its future income streams, or does it want to kill them? And that's the decision it's got to make.
Yeah, sorry, that's a supplementary there for you, from me. Are you concerned by the increasing complexity of the fiscal regime at all?
You're already seeing now that quite a few companies do not understand the tax regime in the UK. So that's great news for people like Derek, because clearly they can spend professional hours, I'm sure, helping them to understand it. But it also means that people struggle then to make the right investment decisions because they've got a foggy mind as to what the actual economic output is from their investment choices. And so, yes, we have a more complicated regime. Do I know a simple answer to it? No, I don't. But if complexity allows some of the difficult things to go ahead, then that's the game we're in. And I'm pleased to say we can afford an awful lot of tax advisors when it comes to some of the investments we have to make.
Thanks, Mike. That was unfair of you. So, Derek, to come back to the original one, what do you expect?
Yeah, I think we should definitely not see this as some sort of one-off big hit, and then for the next 5-10 years there's a stability. I just believe that the province is such that it will continue to be dynamic, it will continue to change. There will be a need for industry and that quality of dialogue to be maintained, and we should absolutely seek to do that regardless of what is announced later on in March, because there will be a need to be ever closer to government as those developments take place, because the industry will and the pressures that it's under will continue to change. Things will not get, I suspect, any simpler technically and economically necessarily out in UKCS over the next few years. There will be a need to continue with a quality fiscal dialogue with HMRC as we go on from here.
Okay, thank you. James?
Malcolm, if I could add a comment on the complexity. Complexity is just another word for cost. So for me, if we're dealing with oil prices at $120 a barrel, I think the industry can afford the complexity and the talent required to understand complex fiscal environments. If we're dealing with a $40 world, we'll need a totally different solution.
Thanks, James. Okay, moving on. Derek, we'll start with you if we might on this one. How much of the E&A activity lost over the last 2 to 3 years is down to lack of borrowing equity funding, and what can be done? So, there you are.
I think it's broadly impossible to quantify exactly what the cost will have been through difficulties in the funding situation. There is no doubt there's a direct correlation into the E&A activity levels from difficulties around access to finance. And I think what can be done, there is without question a need for some of the things around the business models of some businesses needs to be looked at. The need for further collaboration, consolidation of some businesses would be helpful to resolving some of those issues. But equally, on the funders' side of things, as I mentioned, some more innovative thoughts around the circumstances which quite a number of businesses at the smaller end as well, looking at E&A, are faced with. And is it conceivable that we could have a different club approach to funding, for instance, or some other way to free up finance into that particular space of E&A?
Okay, thanks. Mike, do you want to?
I'd echo Derek's sentiments in terms of it's quite a complicated dynamic. I think access to funds has really caused some major difficulties for some of the smaller companies, both because of the hangover of the banking crisis and also access to equity for new E&A work, which is quite difficult these days. What you are seeing, though, in the near term is that there has been an increasing trend of some of the larger companies picking up the E&A mantle again. They have for a while perhaps stepped a bit back from that, but they're doing some of the bigger and bolder things, which frankly only they can afford to do. But these things come in waves, and we need to be able to make sure we can equip the next wave of small companies with the financial resources they need to pick up some of the smaller, risky opportunities which fit best to their appetite. And so we do need to see more funds coming in, and hopefully as the banking dynamics continue to calm down and the markets are stronger these days than they were even a year ago, that we see more finance coming back in for smaller companies. But it is very much a progressive journey.
Thanks, Mike. James, anything you want to add?
I don't actually find access to capital a barrier, so maybe I'm lucky. I have capital to spend in this basin, so I have choice on where to spend it. For me, there's a lot of money being invested around the world in oil and gas provinces. I do believe the biggest challenge that UK faces is attracting that capital here. 4% allocation for what was 10 years ago the 5th largest oil producing province is not enough.
Thanks. James, this is one for you. James Eden's avoided talking about decommissioning. Does this mean that major companies see decommissioning as a trading chip towards getting additional field allowances? Here you are, James. That's a nice friendly question.
It's an interesting question. We have been really careful not to suggest that field allowances is integral with decommissioning, tax relief on decommissioning. We have pitched them within Treasury as two separate initiatives, and we've evaluated the benefit of both initiatives separately. For me, they're almost necessary and sufficient. I mean, first thing we need to do is have security on decommissioning so there's a desire to promote further investments. And then we need to actually make the reward for those further investments more material to our shareholders. If we can't have certainty on decommissioning tax security, harvesting the last 1 million barrels out of a mature field becomes an unnecessary distraction. And that's a tragedy for UK PLC. So I think in our efforts with working with Treasury, we've been very clear to say, this is what you get if you sort out decommissioning. You get life extension because companies will invest in all the way down to that final last barrel they can find. You'll get assets trading hands, allowing them to be into the hands of producers that wish to continue to invest in them without these massive burdens on fiscal security. So that would enable, I think, on the order of 1.7 billion barrels. And another 1.3 billion barrels in the basin can then be enabled if, with the asset, with the right attitude and in the right hands, actually can incentivize the marginal barrels in those assets. So through our ask for government, we've been clear not to cloud the issue. It's not just one, it's 2 steps. We've been able to quantify the benefit of both, and we have actually been asked, well, how much of that mature field stuff would you do if we just gave you decommissioning security? And we've been very clear to respond, well, none. We'll give you 1.7 billion barrels if we get security, and we'll give you another 1.3 if you incentivize the marginal barrel. So I think we've been clear and upfront about what each step will deliver to the basin.
Thanks very much, James, and that was very clear too. Derek, is there anything you want to add on that? You're okay with it. I'm I'm afraid I'm going to have to... Thank you so much for the questions. We're going to make the panel work. This is going to be the last question if we're going to get you out of here on time. There are a number yet unanswered, so we'll put those on the website. Last question. Is there a danger that the UKCS could be overheating? Do we have the capacity to take higher levels of activity on board? Michael, should we start with you and go to James and then finish with Derek?
I tend to go by some very strange thermometers when it comes to the overheating side. And I actually go with how much my ear gets bent, both by E&P companies saying that some of our supply chain members, I think the phrase gouging them would never have been used, but they're giving them a bit of a hard time. Or the pressures on the system. And I'm relieved to say that that's the one thing that you do not hear. Yes, there are some places where businesses are under some duress to try and actually get their work done, but you don't get the feeling that at any part of the business at the minute are things overheating. Quite the reverse, people have geared up for this, they're prepared for this, and it's not just the UK that is spending a lot of money. The global energy business is big. And probably the biggest competition we face in the UK, I suspect, will actually be in the years ahead between ourselves and some of the other forms of energy which are aspiring to see strong investment, both around renewables and maybe eventually nuclear as well. So I still think that we're sitting in a very contained and measured basis.
Thanks very much. James?
I think access to talent is still a barrier. I think one of the best ways to resolve that is to attract more young engineers and young professionals into this business. And I think the best way to achieve that is to show a healthy, viable 15-year investment plan, which we can show if we can unlock the marginal barrel today in this basin. So yeah, we're all going to work hard. We're probably going to need more of us to work hard. Does the UK have that talent? Can it be directed to this industry? Yes. Is there enough space in our offshore environments for all those people to have a site to work? Yes. Could we as an industry be twice as busy as we are today? I actually firmly believe that, yes, we could be. I think that'd be a brilliant place to be. And I do highlight that, the capital we're spending is only delivering a third of the barrels. It is more expensive today. So if we just look at the capital number, we can be misled about how active the industry is. Realistically, the industry today is only a third as busy as it was 10 years ago. We're just spending 3 times as much money doing that same task.
Thank you very much, James. Derek, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just a reference back to the some of the cost summaries that we saw from the survey, actually. Year on year, we've seen those curves upwardly trend. That suggests to me that we should be cautious about where that takes us. The question was, are we overheating? That is a possible indicator that we could be moving towards such a state. So I would just say be cautious about that.
Yeah. Well, I think I've got a slight comment on that. I think James's point about talent being key is hugely important. And one of the very successful initiatives we as an industry have done is the technician training scheme. And could I just remind everybody, we're just about to go out for the recruitment for that again this year. And if your company is not participating in that at the moment, can you think about joining it in and doing your bit to grow that great technician base? And it's been a very successful project over time, and it's one that we've really got to carry on with, I'm sure. Talent, I think, is going to be key to all of this at the end of the day. Well, that really is it. It's time for us to wrap up and let you get on about your business. First, I'd really like to thank our panel of speakers here. I hope you agree with me that was a bravura performance, fantastic performance. Thank you very much indeed. And can you please join with me in thanking them in the usual way?